Well, welcome to Site Leaders Connect, everyone. This is our latest Insight interview. I'm very excited. Today we have Janet Ferone with us, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then she's got a great topic to share with us. It's very important for students and for what's going on in our nation right now. So, Janet, can you please start by just introducing yourselves and tell us why you chose to go into education and leadership?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience. I have probably an interesting trajectory to education. Growing up, while I loved school, I'm a product of the New York City public schools, a long career in education. Right now, I'm president of Ferone Educational Consulting, and based on my work, I go into schools and help them serve all their students with special needs, create welcoming atmospheres, safe schools. But my intent was not to be a teacher. I was an early feminist, was not going to be a nurse or a teacher. And I went into a liberal arts college and did a program, individual major in gender correlates of human behavior. So I was really on the gender area, became president of the National Organization for Women in Boston, and was focused on that. But in the meantime, began working in schools because I needed a job and realized that I really was attracted to that. Initially thought I would go into counseling and then saw the difference that I could make in the classroom. So early on, though, I knew I wanted to work with students, not the large class, but individuals that I got to know on a personal level. And that has carried through my over 30-year experience. Most of my experience is in the Boston public schools, some in New York, but primarily Boston, where I've been running and creating programs for students, as I said, for over 30 years. Initially, I was running substantially separate programs for students with behavioral difficulties, middle and high school students, a lot of very high poverty area, a lot of inner city urban issues with crime, students being witness to violence, being victims of violence and abuse, a lot of gang and court involved students. So I was working with some really rough kids and realized early on that coercion and obedience, it just wasn't, it wasn't me and it wasn't going to work. So what I really got out of the years of that is really working on the relationships, the mutual respect. A lot of my peers and family were frightened. Oh my God, you're this little white woman going in these, what they would call ghetto schools. But you would build a rapport, you would build a relationship. I mean, it got crazy and hairy at times, and it wasn't always, rainbows and butterflies, but felt like I was really able to make a difference with this really, really rough group of kids. And I have, this goes back 30 plus years. I have students who contact me, they're in their 40s, they have their own children. I went to an IEP meeting with one of them, my students, because she was struggling with her own child. And, she couldn't believe that I would do that, but it was so easy for me and so meaningful to be able to help. But after doing that work, with the real acting out violent kids, the district contacted me and said, the group of students with behavioral issues is kind of leveled off, but what we're seeing is a real increase in mental health issues, and we don't have programming for those students. So I was sent into another Boston public high school after the school year started, without the headmaster really knowing this was going to be happening. So it was an interesting start. But basically, there were students who had been multiply hospitalized for suicide, refusing to go back to school, not knowing where they could actually go to school. So I was able to hire a social worker, and together we put together a program. It was an inclusion model. The students were attending the general ed classes, but one period a day, we had a room, like a therapeutic study hall. And we really we looked at some other programs, but basically we put together what we thought made sense for our students, supporting them from before school to after school. That room was always open. A lot of kids with depression and anxiety, they're afraid of the cafeteria, the social interaction, the noise, the potential for a fight to break out. So we always had lunch in the room. We had breakfast for them. They could check in, and most of them checked in almost between every single class. There were times when a student would come to school and say, I can't go to any classes. And we welcomed them to come in the room. We would go get the work for them and, keep them in the room with us. Naturally, they had counseling. We connected with their outside. Most of them had outside therapists, medications, things like that. So throughout the years, I've really had a background in just working very personalized, because it wasn't about, a lot today is about the test scores. Massachusetts is one of 13 states where in order to graduate, you're passing that high stakes exam. So staff as well as students, those for me are, if you're just focusing on the test scores, you're not getting anywhere, the remediation, unless you're engaging the students, unless you're connecting them. And again, having a relationship with a supportive adult is one of the key factors in whether a student will graduate and be successful. So it's, we're really looking at relationships, at counseling services, at creating a school-wide culture where everyone's welcomed, where everyone is included, regardless of what your ethnicity might be, how you express your sexuality, what your socioeconomic status is. So a lot of my work is with specific students, but also with globally looking at a school and saying, how can we make this a place where students feel respected, safe, and their needs are being met?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jen. I definitely agree that I think I had a bit of an echo here. Let's see. There we go. That's better. I definitely agree that it's all about relationships and about, if those students don't feel that they have a safe place to be, the test scores won't come anyway, and so I really appreciate your comments on that. And I would certainly agree with your philosophy and have seen that work as well. My question is, how would most of our viewers are educational leaders. Many of them are site leaders, district leaders. So what would you think would be good first steps in making sure that we create safe spaces for our students? What would be system changes that would maybe be the first things to begin looking at if they want to make sure that they have programs to support students with mental health issues?
It's such a big question, but I love it. Having been a school leader, as I said, for so many years, you take a look and you see what you have. We want everyone to be safe. We do have school police. We do have, the officers in the building. But I think looking at relationships across the board, how are those school police officers interacting? As you know, particularly with males of color, there's a very serious problem with the police relationships. Mm-hmm. We've been really lucky in Boston that, number one, we have a lot of officers of color who are, they see themselves as the friendly officer. They develop relationships with the students so that they're not just policing and setting up that adversarial. So really looking at that relationship. Really educating the educators. There is a perception sometimes that, these teens are just being dramatic and, everything is drama to them. But there is such documented evidence that the increases in mental health issues are really just every year going up and up. So to educate the teachers, we have a curriculum called Breaking Free from Depression, which is from Children's Hospital in Boston, that uses videos and activities so that the teachers can be trained in really understanding what this looks like. I think most schools have student support teams, really looking at that. What is the makeup of that? Do you have a psychologist? Do you have a counselor? Who do you have on that team? Do you have screening tools within the building? It's a lot to screen all the kids. We used a system called BMAS, which was an online system where the teachers would enter the different demographic, different information of observation. And then we were able to use that data to really highlight which students were falling in the at-risk areas. Another big thing is discipline. Years ago, zero tolerance became like the big buzzword, and it just really doesn't work, particularly with youth of today. Looking at restorative practices, there's, most people probably have heard of restorative justice. There's a little graphic that I was really taken with. A young man named Carlos enters the building. He's late. In a zero tolerance school, they pull him and say, you got detention, here you go. Go to your class. In the restorative school, they pull them aside and say, gee, we noticed it's been this many times you've been late. Is there a problem? Are you responsible for a younger sibling? What's happening? What can we help with? And it goes through the student who's been given the detention gets into trouble in the next class because he's kind of aggravated, and then winds up getting into an altercation with a student. Both students get arrested at school and are sent to a detention center. In the restorative side, the student is upset during the class because it is an issue of family matters. Someone pulls him aside after class, addresses that with him. He still is upset, gets into a little argument with a kid, but they have restorative mediation where the students can come together. And then the outcome is he leaves having a really good day, whereas the other outcome is that school to prison pipeline that we've been hearing so much about. Another thing to me that's so important is when you walk in the school, what do you see? What do you feel? There's so much you can do with visuals. I visited a school last year and I was so struck. We walked in, there was a rainbow flag and a peace sign. Right away, I was like, oh yeah, I want to be in this school. There are corridors for famous people, and it included, there was Mahatma Gandhi Way and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and using the different racial, ethnic identities. There was also a lot of females, really making the kids who are walking in feeling that, they're welcome. And then for students who really are having the more specialized needs of mental health issues, really looking at what are we doing with our funding, what partnerships can we make. We have a lot in Boston, outside agencies coming in that we're able to make partnerships with, because there are never enough school counselors. There are never enough support services. There's a new, I don't know if you've heard a lot about it, but a lot of counseling through sports now. We have a program in Boston called Doc Wayne, where kids who would not engage with traditional counseling are able to be on a basketball court, and then somebody elbows them and the counselor is on the court saying, okay, stop the action. What just happened here? How are you feeling? How are you going to deal with it? So there's so many alternatives, lots of groups that can be formed, safe spaces. It's just such a bigger picture than we're going to send that student to counseling off-site or even within our building. There's so much in terms of resources. The Trauma-Informed Schools website is really excellent because whether you're dealing with behavior or depression, usually there's a history of what's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and really seeing how that can play out with students, regardless of how they're manifesting. So, there's really a lot that a school leader can look at, and also look to the district. What district supports are there? Sometimes they're not communicated that well. Boston recently named an assistant superintendent for social emotional learning. There's a lot of programs now where we do self-regulation with the students in large groups. So we're teaching them how to diminish their anger, how to problem solve, who can you go to. So there's so much out there. ASCD has a variety of books, Fostering Resilient Learners is one that I've used a lot. There's a lot of information on my website, which is feroneconsult.com. A lot of links on my blog page and others. But really, it's so easy to find resources now that this has been this subject is really out in the open more with the school shootings and with so much that's going on. The Restorative Justice website is also another one that I would definitely recommend.
Well, thank you. I really I could sense your passion for what you do, and I really feel that this is something that I'm glad it's coming to light, because we can't get to the academics if students don't feel safe. And part of fostering that resiliency, I think I was listening. I had the opportunity to listen to Manny Scott, one of the original Freedom Writers.
Oh, I just saw him at ASCD last week.
Oh, yeah. He's awesome. But what I loved is he said sometimes when there are students that have had trauma in their lives, you have to give them time to heal before you immediately ask them to be resilient and to show grit. And I'm paraphrasing there, but I thought that was a great way to think about, as educators and as leaders, we need to create places for that to occur, and we need to sometimes give them time. And so, as you were saying, sometimes those students weren't ready to go into those classrooms, and that was okay. We'll bring the work to you. We will work with you. And so I really appreciate that. I think that's a great message. I was going to ask you if there were other ways to find out about your topic, but you have already given several, which was awesome. And I'll be sure to, on the description of this video, to include the link to your website, of course, and your blog, so that people can definitely follow you and follow your work and access all of those resources. Is there anything? What are some, before we end here? What would you say would be you gave us quite a bit of insight, but some inspiration, some for those that are just wanting to move forward with this topic and make a difference in their schools? What's kind of a final word of advice you can give them?
Well, I think that it's overwhelming to see the statistics, to see how many kids are, in suicidal situations and cutting themselves, things like that. But I think there's so much hope. For so many years, it's been under the radar. And now that it's a little more open, the year I started the program for students with depression and anxiety, we had a young woman who had been hospitalized 4 times in her 9th grade year. She came to us in 10th grade year, blossomed, graduated, is now a junior in college. And since 9th grade, she stated she wanted to be a neuroscientist. And there she is in her junior year. It's students who keep in touch. When you see what a difference that just one person or group of people can make. The other thing, to really think about your staffing in your schools, there's a lot of emphasis on STEM and science and technology, engineering. That's great. But what about the social worker? What about the school counselor? What about some of the best people that I've worked with have been the social workers, who literally have saved lives just by virtue of the way they're able to work with students who, again, students don't walk in and reveal all this information to you. So really being able to keep the hope, keep the relationship, keep the idea that these are young people who've gone through trauma, and that there is the other side. They can move forward on that. I've seen it countless times, as I said, students who come back and get back in touch. On my birthday on Facebook, I weep the whole day because they pour their hearts out usually and saying, one of them was saying, you made us realize we were much worth thought we were. And that has always stuck with me, that if I'm able to do that, that was a good day's work.
Well, thank you, Janet. I really, truly appreciate your sharing your story. And I do believe I do believe that we are in the business as educators of saving lives, and so I thank you for that. I thank you all that you do. I want to encourage everybody that's watching this to certainly connect with Janet. Go to her website and be sure to at least take one step in make one new action in making a safe place for all of our students, particularly those that are needing our support for their mental health issues. Thank you, Janet, and we will be sure to follow Janet, like I said, and check out the www.siteleadersconnect.org website if you haven't already for more insight. Thanks so much, Janet.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.